Thanks everyone for joining. I'm a product manager with Teams Engineering. I have with me my colleague Arun Kumar as well. We are excited to take you through the features and capabilities of the latest app sample that we had published under the PnP Teams Dev Samples. This sample app, Virtual Event Manager as we call it, is extremely powerful in the sense that it bundles a variety of marquee Teams platform capabilities in one single app. Specifically, this sample app will help you as a developer to get to play with the following key aspects. The first one, of course, is the calling and meeting bots. We have bots that can be registered and set up such that it can initiate peer-to-peer calls, invite more people into an existing or ongoing call by using Graph APIs for calls and online meetings. We call them as communication APIs. This app sample that we have over here utilizes such a bot to initiate a call and pull participants into the call. The next one, or the key capability that we are highlighting in this sample code, is apps and Teams meetings. I'm sure most of you would know about this. Not so recently, I think it would be some 4 or 5 months back, we had announced about the availability of Teams apps in a meeting surface. You all know and are familiar with apps that are in the personal scope, that are in a team or channel scope. Now you can have the goodness of Teams apps on the meeting surface as well. If you don't know about this, I strongly recommend that you check out the developer documentation around this. We have a good amount of information and a sample code app as well that talks about how you can build apps specifically for Teams meetings and how that experience would look and feel like for the end users. This is a really interesting capability, and this unlocks a huge number of scenarios. So apps and Teams meeting is definitely something that you should check out if you haven't heard about this so far. But this is old news, right? Like, what this sample does in addition to apps and Teams meeting is it uses a Graph API to programmatically add an app that we want into a meeting with no manual intervention at all. Third capability, this app will also showcase a use of OneNote Graph APIs that we use to save notes that you take during a meeting into a OneNote section and a page of your choice. Finally, I think this is also very important, especially when you're developing apps in education sector scenarios, right? The app provides a way for you to programmatically capture attendance of people who actually join the calls. Not all the attendees, but people who actually join the calls. So be on the lookout for these 4 points, these 4 capabilities in our demo now. What you see over here is basically a demo of the app in action. We open the app, and this is primarily designed from as a personal scope app. We have a tab SSO that we are using for signing in. And once we sign in, we use the personal scope tab interface that you see over here to create a Teams meeting. This step uses a Graph API called Create Event Graph API that uses input parameters such as the subject, the participant information that we enter, which is, by the way, uses a people picker. And we use the input parameters, also the start date and time, end date and time of a meeting, to call the API and schedule a meeting according to those parameters. Now, this gets added to all the attendees' calendar on its own and creates a Teams meeting join URL as well, as you're familiar. Once this event is created, this is a crucial step. If you see over here, at the time of meeting, the bot actually calls you. There is an actual call that gets placed to the user. This is a meeting join notification that typically appears for any team meeting. But in this case, there's a bot calling all the attendees. And when you click on answer, you get pulled into a meeting. That's the way a calling and meeting bot works. And once inside a meeting, you can have a business logic such that you can have an IVR on entering a certain sequence, the person is pulled into a meeting. That's up to your business logic. As you can see over here, the bot also is a participant. This is the other person also getting pulled into a meeting. If you see over here, the bot is also added as a participant in the meeting. What this means is, whatever we have in terms of audio or video discussions as part of the meeting is something that a bot gets access to as well. While this is not something that we use as part of the sample app, this is potentially something that you can extend, you can take up and do some audio or video processing of the content that is presented in the meeting or discussions that happen in the meeting. A possible idea that I'm just throwing out there is, since the bot gets access to the audio stream as well, you can potentially use some kind of audio processing to do live translations as well. Now, the third capability that we talked about is adding an app as part of the meeting, right? That's what you see over here. Now, in this case, we didn't add an app to the meetings manually. This has been programmatically added by the app, by the business logic itself, using a Graph API, which we will cover in much more detail in a bit. What you see over here is, using this app surface on the side panel, we are able to, the users, the attendees in this particular meeting are able to capture notes that are happening during the meeting. Any team discussions, anything that you want to be added as notes can be captured on the side panel. And when saved or shared, this is calling the OneNote Graph APIs in the backend and storing it in the OneNote section and page that we create programmatically as well. This is a beautiful integration across a meeting surface, an app on Teams platform, and OneNote, all different platforms within ecosystem coming together in one go. In the same way, you can also use not just OneNote Graph APIs, think about using tasks and other APIs as well, and integrate taking notes and action items as part of a meeting right in one place. The last part that I mentioned regarding capturing the attendee details who joined the meeting, right? This is also equally important when you think about education scenarios. In a lot of education sector, one of the frequent asks that we hear from customers is the ability to programmatically capture who joined the meeting and when, and then report it in some form of a dashboard. Now, this sample app provides you a means to do that. What it does is, it periodically captures the snapshot of attendee information every 3 minutes. When I say periodically, it captures every 3 minutes and logs it in Azure Cosmos DB. So you have all the list of attendees at 3-minute interval, which you can potentially merge all these snapshots and then do your own processing and analysis on top of it to come up with a meeting capture attendance. With that, I would want to hand over to my colleague Arun to walk you through rest of the capabilities in much more detail in the technical layer.
Thanks, Sathya. And myself, Arun. So I am working in Teams partner ecosystem as a full stack developer and supporting partners as well as developing these sample codes. So whatever Sathya showed, it is already available in the PnP samples and in the GitHub. As Sathya said, there are the 4 different sections on this. The first section is creating online event. So for that, we used this Graph API. For all my samples, we used delegated permissions, but this is the Graph API we used for creating an event. So whenever you will create an event with the parameters like users and the subject and the participants, it will take that input and it will create a online event in your calendar so that participants also can see that meeting in their calendars. That is the first Graph API which we used. And the second one is, once we created an online event, based on that time or based on that scheduled time, by calling an online meeting bot. In this case, I used audio call, and my calling an online meeting bot will initiate the call to rest of all the folks, and they can join the call. Once they can join the call, we also used a Graph API called list of participants. That means whoever joining the meeting, I want to capture all those people and store it into one storage. Either in my case, I stored in the Cosmos DB, but we can also store it in the SQL, also wherever you require. But we used a Graph API to capture all the list of participants. This is a communication API in that you need to pass the caller ID. Call ID, that means our meeting ID. Then you can able to get all the participants information from that call. So these are the 3 different sections. One is online creating an event using this Graph API. Once we created an event, then used a calling an online meeting bot. After that, we used a list of participants. Now, coming to that app in a team, or how we developed an app in a team. So this is the documentation which Sathya shared. So in our case, we used side panel experience. So there are the four different experiences if you want to develop any app for a meetings. One is like a pre-meeting app experience. Another one is a pre-meeting tab, and another one is a post-meeting. The other one is a in-meeting dialogue. So in-meeting dialogue means it will use a notification API, and also it will pop up like a task model in a meeting. The last one is the side panel one, which we used it. This one is a side panel. So if once you install your app, so that the app icon you can able to see here, and you can able to see all your window here. This is called a side panel. So in our sample, we used a side panel app, so that you can capture your all notes information. You can capture OneNote updates in the meeting as a owner, or as a member. I can update my notes also. So we took that concept, and we added side panel app in our sample. And how we can, earlier we don't have a graph API to add any app into meeting, but recently there is a new graph API is introduced, and this is the graph API for that. So if you want to add any app into meeting, you can use add a app to chart. That means you can able to add a chart using a chart ID, using a in-person chart ID, or using a group chart ID, or using a meeting chart ID. You can able to add your app into particular meetings. So in that case, in our case, we use this graph API, and we used a delegated permission for this, but this is also will support for application permissions as well. Once so using that, we are able to add our app into that particular meeting, whatever we created using online meeting. So it is like a sequence. Once we created an online event, based on that meeting ID, I can able to add an app which is already installed in my tenant. So there's a sequence like we followed. It's like once we created online event meeting, or after we created online event meeting, based on that meeting ID, based on the chart ID, which I already installed my OneNote app into my tenant, that app I installed into every meeting. So imagine that if you have a doctor and patient condition, like if you want to, as a admin, if you want to schedule a calls, so that you can schedule a call, so that in every meeting, if you want to add a meeting, so that you can use this automation, or you can use this graph APIs to do all those things. And finally, for our sample, we used a notebook graph APIs to create a notebook on fly. So in my case, I used a notebook called group/ID, because I binded for one particular group ID. That's why we created a OneNote graph APIs. And once we created a OneNote page as a owner, as a meeting owner, I'll create a first OneNote page. Once it is created as a member, I can update that particular page, and I can update my notes. So these are the different graph APIs we used as part of this sample.
Thanks for walking through that, Arun. In terms of what you saw over here is just a framework, right? A sample app, right? As we rightly call it, it's a sample app. It's a base framework that has been given to you, which you can extend into multiple use case scenarios that you can build as a full-fledged app, and you can take it to other customers or build for your own requirements. Now, in terms of what scenarios can potentially be lighted up using the sample app is what you see over here. This is not a complete list. This is just a starting point. I'm just giving you some ideas to think along these lines. Definitely, like Arun mentioned right now, there is even a doctor-patient scenario that can be lighted up now. What you see over here is in an education sector, using the sample app, you can extend some parts of it to build a solution, to build an app that allows professors or teachers to create Teams meeting for classes and have a bot listen in and transcribe that meeting into a language of choice for students. It can even listen for keywords that need to be marked or tagged, and you can do further analysis based on that. Students part of the same class who want to take notes together can use the side panel, and all notes that can be taken can also be grouped together in a particular location within Teams. And of course, the attendance report feature is something that we saw already. In an enterprise scenario, take any enterprise, there is always manager team meetings that happen. Definitely, this could be used as a collaboration mechanism for teams to come together, keep track of nodes across different meeting instances and action items. And you can, like I mentioned earlier, even integrate tasks and planner into this. Collaborating on learning and development would also be made easier by this, by way of having questions posed during training session and gathering participant answers. The side panel, as you saw in the documentation, the opportunities are limitless. In terms of Helpdesk Contact Center, this is another area that calling and meeting bot would be vital. Imagine any contact center scenario, right? When someone raises a support request, it gets assigned to an available agent. The app that we currently have calls the attendees that are explicitly mentioned. You can customize it such that when a support request comes through, the bot looks up a set of agents in a database, identify who's available based on their presence or shift timings or calendar availability, and then call an agent who is currently available who can answer that particular request. So in this way, you can use this sample app as a base and can actually build a contact center solution as well. These are some of the ideas that I want to put in front of you. Of course, there are multiple other scenarios that you can imagine and build on top of this. And I'm happy to hear if you have any questions, anything around this, and we can take the questions in the Q&A section. Over to you, Jim.
Awesome. This was super interesting and really great. Thank you, Sathya and Arun. Really appreciate it.